You've become something of a social media rock star. All of you, after this lecture, should go out and look at the blog, the notorious RB... Templar.
You got that? It's a Tumblr, not a blog, that Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the star of. The notorious RBG, that's what it's called. Features the notorious RBG jack-o'-lantern. Features kids dressed up like the Supreme Court Justice. Also recently, John Oliver's HBO show Last Week Tonight offered footage of the 9 Supreme Court justices as dogs. So there you can see the Chihuahua version of Ruth Bader Ginsburg if you want. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was appointed to the court by Bill Clinton back in 1993, 21 years ago now. She has survived 2 separate battles with cancer. Just a few years after joining the court, she had cancer surgery. She returned without missing a hearing. She works out twice a week with a personal trainer. Supposedly, she can do 20 military push-ups. That's 20 real push-ups. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the longest-serving liberal on the Supreme Court right now. There's a block of 4 liberals on the court. She has been there, the longest of them. Last month, the court's 5-member conservative majority decided to let the controversial voter ID law in Texas stand, and that ruling was published. It was published along with a fierce dissent that was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and it was published at 5 in the morning, 5 a.m. on a Saturday. That means that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had stayed up all night, that Friday night, early Saturday morning, writing that dissent. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is passionate, she's strong, and she's also 81 years old. And because time is time and humans are mortal, she knows that people wonder when she might step down. And some difficult political realities go along with that speculation. She got asked about it directly back in September. An interview for Elle magazine said, quote, "I'm not sure how to ask this, but a lot of people who admire and respect you wonder if you'll resign while President Obama is in office." The answer came back from Justice Ginsburg. Who do you think President Obama could appoint at this very day, given the boundaries that we have? If I resign any time this year, he could not successfully appoint anyone I would like to see in the court. She said she feels strong. She said she is not stepping down anytime soon. That was September. That was before the election. That was back when Democrats still controlled the Senate. Democratic majority evaporated with the elections this month. And come January, Republicans are going to control the Senate. And because they control the Senate, it means they're going to control the process for picking nominees for the federal bench, for the Supreme Court. Already the elections had put Ruth Bader Ginsburg's tenure on the court in a whole new light. And then we got this morning's news. During her routine workout yesterday, Ruth Bader Ginsburg felt a little discomfort. As the spokesman for the court described it, she went to the hospital where their doctors put a stent in her right coronary artery. That's a way of keeping the blood flowing through that artery. The Supreme Court today released a statement saying that Ginsburg is resting comfortably, expects to be released from the hospital in the next 48 hours. Now, if this story plays out as everyone hopes, it means Ruth Bader Ginsburg will return back home soon. She'll be back on her feet in no time, back at work. Maybe she'll do all of that with the anxious eyes of the nation's liberals willing her to long and lasting health. Because this story does raise an uncomfortable subject. The window for trying to replace her under a Democratic Senate and a Democratic a Democratic Senate has now pretty much closed. What follows now is a path that is at best uncertain for any nominee from President Obama, whether it's for the high court or a federal bench or his new pick for Attorney General. Joining us now is Jess Bravin. He's the Supreme Court correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Jess, thanks for being with us tonight. So let me just ask you if there have been, we had that the quote from Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which seemed pretty ironclad back in September, saying, look, right now, I don't like who we could appoint. I don't imagine she's reassessed anything since the November elections, but have there been any indications from her more recently on this subject?
No, it's been the same story for the past couple of years. I mean, there have been a few liberal law professors and others who suggested that she retire strategically, create an opening that President Obama could then fill. She has not been interested in doing that, and she's made it very clear that she intends to stay on as long as her health allows. And now, of course, with her hospitalization today, we got to, wonder, well, how long does that allow? Her colleague, John Paul Stevens, retired at age 90 and is still going strong. So that question remains open. All we know is that she wants to stay on as long as she says she can do the job.
Yeah, and look, and obviously everybody wishes her nothing, but the best of health and in the longest possible life. But there is this nightmare scenario for Democrats here where, for whatever reason, if Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is forced involuntarily to leave the court and there's a Republican president, that means that the most liberal justice on the court would then be replaced by presumably a conservative Republican president. Do you agree with her assessment that, if she were to have resigned this year or in the past 2 years, that the president could not have appointed a successor comparable to her in ideology?
Well, it's hard to say because it depends how much of an issue the Republican minority would have made an Obama nominee. I mean, over the past 4 Supreme Court nominees have had pretty close to party line votes. Both Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Samuel Alito were opposed by half or most Democrats when they were appointed by President Bush. Most Republicans opposed Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, President Obama's 2 appointees in his first term. What would happen now when the president is in a weaker position and Republicans are eager to try to fill that slot? Hard to say. They might want an older nominee who they think might not serve as long. There are all kinds of questions. But one point to keep in mind is that judicial appointments, particularly Supreme Court appointments, seem to matter a lot more to the Republican base than they have to the Democratic base politically. It's a much bigger issue for Republicans than it is for Democrats, and because the Republicans care so much more about these vacancies, it's quite likely that they would make a big deal about it in the Senate.
Do you think they would appreciate any difference, or Republicans in general would appreciate any difference between if Ruth Bader Ginsburg were to resign and President Obama's in office, she's a liberal, he'd appoint a liberal, the court stays balanced, versus if Scalia were to go, there's a conservative and he's replacing with a liberal, then the balance of the court changes. Would that factor into how they posture on this?
I think absolutely yes. I think they would give President Obama somewhat more leeway were it Justice Ginsburg or one of the other 3 more liberal members of the court who stepped down. But if it were one of the 5 conservatives, I would expect the Republicans to fight very hard to either keep that vacancy open until the next president takes office or insist on some kind of compromise nominee or conservative that Obama would find acceptable. And then it becomes a question of how much effort the White House wants to put into this battle as opposed to the many other battles he's going to have in the remainder of his term.
All right, Jess Bravin, Supreme Court correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for your time tonight. Have a great Thanksgiving.
Of course. You too, Steve.
All right, coming up, we will give you your holiday travel forecast. It's going to come with a twist because I'm doing the weather. It's going to be great. Trust me. This is vital information. You're not going to want to miss it.